I'm Robert Mayberry. If you haven't met me as of yet, I'm the co-lead for the capacity building for the National African American Children Family Research Center. I also serve as professor here at Morehouse School of Medicine. Someone asked the question a moment ago, what is joy? This is joy right here. This is us coming together after a long period of time being away from one another. And so it's a pleasure to see persons in person with smiling faces and looking forward to the presentations. We have a very competitive emergent scholar program. Nationwide, we got 45 applications the second year. I forgot the number the first year, but it's amazing the reach of the center. We had a difficult time choosing among the applicants because all of them were good. Some of them were even better. And some of them hit the mark specifically what we were looking for in terms of advancing the center forward. Now, this is our first cohort. And our first cohorts, there's a little bit of growing pain here and there. They won't tell you that. And I'm not going to tell you the specifics, but they have helped us out a lot. But see, part of the program is that we want both talented people around the country to help us out. That's the purpose of our program. There is a second cohort that's coming in pretty soon. Some of them are sitting in the audience and identify them as of yet, but nevertheless, they are going to take us forward as well. So through this talent, we have expanded a network far beyond Morehouse School of Medicine. Hopefully, it will be that national network by which all of you will participate in on a regular basis. And as we say here at Morehouse School of Medicine, you can never leave us. You're always a part of who we are. And hopefully we are part of you as well in terms of helping elevate your perspective as well. So the National African American Children Family Research Center has a one-year program. It's a one-year-long internship designed to increase the knowledge and skills of students interested in community-based participatory work around the priority areas of economic and social mobility, early childhood education, child care for African American children. And then I would say, next slide, please, right? Should I be able to do it? It is a personalized experience, and I think what's critical here is the mentoring part of the experience, where the scholars themselves are engaging with our co-investigators to have a wealth of experience, so we get started early on in developing the individual development plan for their success into the future. But they all have an opportunity to have some cross-cultural training in areas that are particularly important for the center. And obviously we provide them with a stipend, but that is just only part of what we do. We think what's critically important is that they have the opportunity to contribute to the research that's aligned specifically with the center itself. Currently, the eligibility, as all of you know, this has improved a little bit because we've gone up from 3.0 to 3.5, I believe, right? So, you know, you have to have 3.5 GPA to get into this wonderful program that, like I said, is competitive across the country. These guys have 3.5, if not higher. They probably all have like 3.9, 8.4, 4.0. They won't tell you that, but I know that's indeed the case. But nevertheless, U.S. citizen permanent residents, and we have made an effort to make sure that we can get African American males to come into the program as well. And we were delighted when two showed up, exceptionally qualified and accepted all the offers. And they've been very good in telling us what they're doing, how they are doing it, and how they're contributing forward. So, for no thought, I think the next slide. And here they are. All right. So who's going to present first? That's who I was going to introduce first. But let me present them in the order in which I started. So I've already introduced Brianna. You guys know who that is, right? Okay, that's a very distinguished face. That is Aaron. Aaron, you are on the back page. Aaron Neal is a PhD candidate in the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan. He earned a bachelor's degree from North Carolina A&T University and a master's in neuroscience education from Teachers College, Columbia University. His research interests examine racialized contextual factors and their impact on mental health and well-being and the development of Black youth. There's a lot of information that I can go on farther on, but Aaron, I won't bore you by going through the extensive resume in a short period of time, even though you haven't graduated as of yet. Now move on to the next. And guess who she is? Adrian. Adrian comes out of North Carolina as well. Make sure I give you the props, because once we get started, I want to make sure that we don't take the time off. Adrian Jones is a candidate in the Joint Public Policy and Sociology program at Duke University. The research interests include racial stratification, inequality, and mobility, where she examines through the lens of employment, training, and public policy. A particular interest to her research agenda are the employment and training experience of Black workers living in the American South. Her dissertation project examines how driver's license experiences structure opportunities for mobility among participants in the Durham expulsion and restoration projects are called DEAR, the Second Chance Driving Program. Last but not least, Terrence, you don't have your hat on. All right, Terrence always stands distinguished as well. Terrence Lewis taught U.S. government, geography, and Georgia studies 4 years as a high school and at the high school and middle school level in Columbus, Georgia. During his time as a classroom teacher, a few roles in which he served included student council sponsor, robotics coach, as well as the wrestling coach. Terrence is currently serving as the Auburn University Provost Fellow, completing his PhD in secondary education. He has a lot of preparedness for his present position that he's in, but he has a lot of experience that he's sharing with us. And one of the things that he enjoys best is that he shares his experience with other youth, and happy that those other youth are beginning to follow in his footsteps. Those are the parts that I remember. So without further ado, we're going to get started with our first presenter. Now, first presenter, I believe, is Neil.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Neal. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan in the clinical psychology program. Today, I'm going to be giving you a brief talk of some preliminary findings on a research project that I did with the National African American Child and Family Research Center under the supervision of Dr. Brian McGregor, who has been instrumental in helping me get this project off the ground. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about justice for the justice involved, an exploration of TANF access, mental health, and economic mobilities for Black Americans. Just a quick roadmap of today's talk. We're going to talk about why is this information important, a brief overview of the intersections between TANF, mental health, justice-involved families, and Black individuals in the United States. I'm going to go over some of my research questions, methodologies that were employed, preliminary results, conclusions, and then some next steps recommendations based off of the findings that we have. So just to give you a brief overview or just some information for those that may not be familiar, TANF, formerly known as like welfare in the United States, or temporary assistance for needy families, is an ACF-funded program that provides cash benefits, childcare, and employment education programming to individuals in the United States that experience financial hardship or poverty, or as a result of poverty. It's a grant-based program where states have administered the benefits to all of those that qualify for recipients or all of those that applied and have access to those benefits. Individuals that are receiving TANF, they have to meet a number of different qualifications in terms of like finances and where they currently sit with their finances. But in addition to that, they have to be applying for jobs or at least be job ready. If they are from a single family household, they have to maintain at least 30 hours of work per week. And from a 2 caregiver household, at least 35 hours of work per week. TANF provides a number of different types of supports to individuals across the United States. However, despite all of the ACF's concerted efforts, there's still areas that could be improved in terms of increase in access to these benefits so that individuals in the United States are above the poverty level. When we think about who specifically receives TANF, we can look at roughly like 2 million individuals across the United States currently are receiving TANF. That's across the US, not just the 50 states, but also the US territories as well. And then I have these things broken down, or these statistics broken down by racial categories. Because our center focuses on African-American children and families, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Black individuals in the US context who receive TANF. It's even more specifically, I'm going to be focusing on 2 states that are within the center's targeted areas of research, which is going to be Georgia and Louisiana. And when we look at the percentage breakdown across the United States, about 28% of individuals that receive TANF identify as African-American, which is well above the 12 to 13% of the individuals in the United States who identify as African-American. And then if we look at Georgia and Louisiana, even more specifically, which is the states that we're going to be focusing on today, about 66% of individuals that are on TANF identify as Black or African-American. So why is this important? Starting back with some of the history around TANF, in 1996, the Personal Responsibilities and Work Opportunities Act was created, and it gave states the ability to make decisions on who has access to TANF. The federal government sort of kind of sets the floor, but then after that, the states have some discretion on who does or does not get access. And then thinking about this even more specifically, Black individuals are 5 to 7 more times likely to be convicted of a crime. The reason why I bring these 2 things together is because when we think about individuals who have access to TANF, those who have a prior history with a drug felony conviction do not have access to apply to TANF in certain states. So if you look at this graph over here to the right, it shows you states that have a full ban, a partial ban, or a fully lifted ban on TANF access with regard to their criminal legal history. And if we look at Georgia, it has a full ban as of 2022. And if we look at Louisiana, it has its fully lifted ban. But we want to explore what are some of the different barriers to access and how does that impact individuals' experiences with mental health? So continuing this thought, why should we care about the intersections between Blackness, justice involvement, and then those who have access to TANF? Individuals receiving TANF are at an increased risk of mental health challenges, specifically depression and anxiety. Black individuals are disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system in comparison to their other racial counterparts. Approximately 41% of individuals who are incarcerated meet DSM-5 criteria for mental health diagnosis. That means that there's this increased number of individuals within the criminal legal system, even before they return into society, who are already meeting criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition. In addition to that, individuals who are justice involved with limited or restricted access to TANF are at an increased risk for recidivism. I think that's an important point that we're going to come back to when we get to some of our findings from today. And then in addition to that, because we want to focus this in not just on the individuals who are returning, but their children, children with present or previously justice-involved parents are more likely to have behavioral health challenges, specifically related to anxiety and externalizing symptoms. Externalizing symptoms is just another way of talking about ADHD is where they typically classify it as, but it also goes into conduct disorder and other forms of aggressive disorders that have been categorized in the DSM. So this brings us to some of our research questions. What were some of the guiding things that we wanted to look for in these community listening sessions? We wanted to specifically explore how do Black individuals and their families access TANF when they are justice involved. We also wanted to look at, are there differences between those directly justice involved and those with family members who are justice involved? So a lot of times we think of this as just the individuals who experience either incarceration, parole, or other justice involvement are the individuals who have barriers to accessing those benefits, but also their family members, while that person is justice involved, may also experience barriers to accessing benefits. And then in addition to that, what can be done to improve access to TANF and other ACF programming for justice involved Black families? So to give you just a snapshot of our methodology, we employed this process called community listening sessions. Traditionally, folks might think of it as a focus group, but really it's a way that the center has gone about employing individuals across the southeastern part of the United States to really ask them what's going on within your community, what are ways that we can tap into what ways you're already accessing benefits, or what ways can we tap into like what are the community organizations in the broad social sphere, and how those individuals are helping individuals to access benefits. So we conducted these focus groups we did 4 focus groups with about 3 to 5 participants each. I know that seems like a low number, but when we think about the individuals that have historically been marginalized as a result of the criminal legal system, and as because of like factors like structural racism, these Black individuals, they may not have access to participating in these sessions. So yeah, we have a low number, but I think it's an important number, and we'll get to some of those things in the findings. These focus groups were conducted via Zoom in either Georgia or Louisiana. And in addition to that, participants were recruited via local community organizations. So as a part of this community engagement strategy, it wasn't like we were just cold calling individuals. A lot of times we partnered with a number of different community organizations, some of which I think are here today. I want to say I appreciate you all. I'm gonna keep it at that to protect anonymity. And those individuals sort of kind of like alley-ooped us to connect us with the community to say like, what's going on? How can we talk? How can we connect in order to figure out what are the ways that you all are experiencing barriers to accessing TANF? The sessions were about 1 hour and 15, 30 minutes long, and individuals were compensated with a $50 virtual gift card. And then in addition to that, the code book was developed by a research team of 2, myself and Dr. McGregor. And then coding was done utilizing thematic analysis. I think it's important that when we think about doing qualitative research, and not even just qualitative, quantitative research, we think about the identities that we hold and the positions that we hold. I am a person that comes from a similar background to some of my research participants. I went to high school in the Metro Atlanta area where a number of my participants reside. I also have a experience with family members who are criminal legal involved, and a former recipient of some of these benefits that the ACF has provided to a number of different families. I think that that is important when I think about this research, because I think about that when I'm analyzing my data. I take an additional level of care because I'm not just a person that's an outsider, but I'm a person that holds some similar positions, but also now currently navigates a place in like higher education and about to hold a doctorate. Yeah, and that means that I also have some differences from those that I've engaged. So jumping into some of the results. I realize y'all can't see the top of that, but I just want to broadly go over this code, but we're going to do some preliminary results today just because we got some of that up. Really? Yeah. Okay.
We'll catch up somehow.
Okay, I appreciate you. So we'll talk about some of my preliminary results. I'm only going to talk about barriers to access and benefits, family and community dynamics, which I think is a really important protective factor for these individuals, and then mental health as an outcome. So just to broadly go over our code book, barriers to access and benefits, we came up with this definition for that. Describes challenges, interpersonal or structural, that keep individuals or their families from accessing necessary benefits like TANF, Head Start, et cetera, that are funded by the ACF. And then we had these subcodes, which are internal systems challenges, interpersonal barriers, justice involvement, personal challenges, and then transportation and housing as a large barrier that individuals consistently thought about as an impediment to accessing benefits. When we think about family and community dynamics, that's best defined or speaks to how individuals connect with each other in order to access benefits or resources. This can be family members, this can be community organizations, this can be Facebook groups. There were a number of different things that individuals within our listening sessions reported as ways that they connected with the community in order to access resources. And then we have this subcode for community organizations, which I think is going to be really important as we continue to analyze this data. And then lastly, we have mental health. It describes outcomes, challenges, and threats. Outcomes as challenges and threats to mental health that impact access to benefits, employment, or both simultaneously. And then we have 1, it comes from the system or a system causing, and then 2, how do individuals manage that stress or how do they cope with some of those difficulties? So here we have some results. I'm going to pull some representative quotes that are specifically going to talk to barriers to accessing benefits and specifically incarceration. Family community dynamics, which is I'm going to talk about community organizations, and then mental health, which is like it's causing from the system. So representative quote, thinking about criminal legal involvement. I want to give a moment for you all to maybe take this in and read it. I know I'm an individual who likes to read silently. So I'm gonna give you all about 10 seconds to really take in what this person had to offer. I'm gonna keep it real with you. Like the nice places housing, they run your background, drug trafficking, denied. They try to say it'd be credit issues, but my credit's not bad. So but I can't get in anywhere, like in the hood, like something that's tore down. They really didn't give a reason. I apply for things, I know I'm gonna get it. And I feel like if I didn't have that on my record, I would have definitely got that job. I think this is a story that comes up all too often around individuals who are criminal legal involved, don't have access to things like housing and don't have access to things like employment, which are directly related to some of these ACF funded programs, specifically thinking about employment as one of the components of TANF. I want to give you a moment to maybe take a look at this community dynamics post. The only way I found out about the resources were from other people by word of mouth, because I didn't know. And it's not like the people were putting it out there. I just happened to start talking to people, and that's how I started finding out. I think that Community Org Redacted, in order to protect anonymity, is a good resource sometimes. And then participating in an organization. So like they have these free events or an event, right, where they have like different organizations coming together, like nonprofits and different community organizations and politicians. I like participating in these sort of events and just kind of like be there who does what, and connecting with local officials connecting with local officials is another good way for people to receive the resources that are necessary to survive and stuff. So these community organizations, I think, are something that can be leveraged, and we're going to get into some of that in my discussion points. And then lastly, thinking about mental health. I have just the hardest time doing the application and getting the application. A lot of people don't notice about me trying. I know you probably never imagined, but I have a lot of social anxiety, and I have some issues, I'm sure stemming from my childhood. Somewhere when I had to do some applications, mostly with the government assistant things, it can cause me to have trouble reading. And this can be with an anxiety situation. So if I'm at Walmart and I get into an argument, then it affects my ability to read, and I'm very intelligent. I can read excellently, but this is what happens. So usually I have to have some worker or some sort to help me fill out the application. So again, I want to reorient you to my research questions around how do Black individuals and their families access TANF when they're justice involved? And just what do we find out from those things? We pulled those representative quotes, but those are just small segments of larger findings. Families that are justice involved or have justice involved family members encounter quite a few barriers to accessing benefits. One of the things that we didn't get to cover is that stigma and interpersonal discrimination. So when individuals are going to the counter to apply for these benefits, they might experience some of that stigma or discrimination that impedes their ability to access those benefits. In addition to that, challenges with paperwork. So like that person said, sometimes they have anxiety or they have other impediments that keep them from being able to access applying for benefits because there's challenges with that paperwork. And then individuals with criminal legal history can't always explicitly name that the criminal legal system is the thing that keeps them from accessing benefits. And I think that that's really important, because if we don't get explicit about naming what some of the challenges are or some of the reasons why individuals are not accessing benefits, we can't then begin to support them as they try to access those benefits. Family and community dynamics, I think, is a really important protective factor. They're essential to navigating benefits. A number of different organizations were mentioned throughout the course of our community listening sessions. So CBOs, nonprofits, and collectives are primary sources of information. In addition to that, a lot of those organizations have Facebook groups and have other social media that was a great way for individuals to connect. And then lastly, thinking about mental health, justice involved individuals may be experiencing additional trauma after returning home. So it's not just about their experiences while incarcerated, it's also about their experiences when they return home and how that then acts as an impediment to them experiencing applying for benefits after they have returned. And then also thinking about anxiety or this constant worrying about losing benefits as another emerging thing that came from out of our findings. And then also stress, like this entire process was extremely stressful, as a lot of the individuals notated from their, notated as they were talking about applying for benefits or navigating multiple systems like SNAP, which is not an ACF funded program, but people talk about if I don't have access to food and I don't have access to housing, my kids don't have this, my kids don't have that. it's just this compounded stress that continues to be added on and impact individuals' experiences with mental health. So I want to conclude with some conclusions, recommendations, barriers, tear them down. That's the take-home message. As much as we can, I know that's a broad claim. I know I'm saying that with thunder in the room, but like as much as we can, let's eliminate a number of the different challenges. Like if we can continue to get states to repeal these full or partial bans on SNAP and on TANF, that will increase access for individuals who have criminal legal histories. And then also thinking about work with states to train their agencies to provide culturally compassionate care. I know a lot of individuals may be familiar with culturally humble or culturally responsive. I like to use culturally compassionate care, where we're thinking about the other individual and really bringing on this empathy component whenever we're sitting across from somebody and applying for benefits. So if we can start to maybe encourage individuals to think about that, we could maybe start to see some changes. Community organizations, I think providing additional funding, additional resources to these community organizations who are doing the groundwork to really get individuals access to these benefits could be really important to leveraging success. And then also thinking about mental health. I read a couple papers that suggested that providing trauma-informed and like basic CBT, that's cognitive behavioral therapy approaches in some of the like interactions that individuals are having interpersonally can really help to improve access to benefits and maintenance of benefits, as well as individuals becoming economically mobile so that they can then no longer be reliant. I'd like to thank all the funders. I'd like to thank, oh, they got messed up. Dr. Brian McGregor and Dr. Latrice Rollins from the center. I'm gonna pass because I know I am well into my time, but thank you all so much.
Thank you. Well, wonderful, great information. As you're sitting down, I ask one question while Dr. Shipp comes up for Brianna. If a justice involved individual gains access to TANF, are they benefiting?
I don't think that I can speak specifically to that based off of our findings. A number of the individuals who were justice involved were talking about how they didn't have access to benefits because of those barriers. So my findings can't speak to it. I think that we should continue to do these community listening sessions so that we can know for sure.
Dr. Smith has agreed to give you a snippet of Brianna's presentation so we can leave time for Terrence and Adrian to present as well. But if you have any additional questions for Aaron, think of them. We might have a little bit of time at the end, and we'll bring them up at that time. Dr. Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Standing in because you're a mentor.
Well, I will be very, very brief. Brianna did in fact prepare this presentation, so I'll just give you highlights. So Bree, as was mentioned, is a medical student at the University of Houston. She has a master's in public health. So she's interested in unpacking health disparities as they are experienced by Black children and families. So as part of her emerging scholar experience, we tapped into some data that I have. During COVID, I collected all kinds of data on the experiences of Black children and families in North Carolina. I was intentional about parsing out geographical differences. So there are rural and urban comparisons as well. We didn't make any of those comparisons here, but just sort of setting the stage. You can't quite see the title, but the premise of our study is to assess associations among mental health and parent-child interaction. I'm gonna breeze through this. We'd like to acknowledge the center and our funding sources. We know that society is in a mental health crisis. Children and families of color, unfortunately, tend to experience mental illness or mental health issues at higher rates, not always diagnosed. And so we really wanted to showcase ways to support Black children and families.
Sorry, guys,
That's okay.
I'm just trying to. you go to high video in the more section. You go down. You should typically,
Trying to get that.
yeah.
Is that better for you guys? How do I get rid of this? Oh, sorry.
This is.
Okay.
Sorry.
You all know the story, so, you know, if a household is experiencing poor mental health, particularly among parents, that can spill over into their interactions with their children. And so at the same time, we know that COVID sort of heightened any mental health issues that were already apparent. You can imagine why. Many parents lost jobs, and even among those who did not lose their jobs, they were still tasked with managing things like virtual learning and just making sure the household remained intact. Our primary research question is, are parent-child interactions negatively impacted as a result of depressive symptoms and perceived stress? So those are our two indicators of mental health in this study, depressive symptoms and perceived stress. And our hypothesis was that there will be a negative association among depressive symptoms, perceived stress, and parent-child interaction. I already walked you through the method. This is just a sneak peek of our sample. So we had a total N of about 182 families, but for this sample, it whittled down to about 168. Most of our sample were under the age of 55. So to qualify, you had to be a parent of a child who was at least 18 years of age or younger. So that's why the age of the parent is a little higher. Mostly female sample, most had a college degree, so on and so forth. All right, so the takeaway here is that both depressive symptoms and perceived stress were significantly associated with harsh parent-child interactions and withdrawn parent-child interactions. We did not find any significant associations with warm parent-child interactions. Our findings are consistent with previous findings linking mental health to parent-child interactions. Although only a handful of studies explore these associations among Black households. So here's where we're adding to the broader body of literature. Also, we still don't know a lot about COVID's impact. COVID is, many would say we're still in it. So there's a lot to uncover still. So there's more work to be done, but this sort of sets the stage for future work on further understanding how parental mental health shapes or is related to parent-child interaction. And here just, you know, future direction. So linking this to social services and policy action, more research on physical and mental health in Black households, and family interactions. There.
Well, thank you so much. The more we know, the more we need to know, but nevertheless, that's the direction that we are taking. And I think she's guiding us directly under your mentorship. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I won't say standing in, but appreciating.
Yes.
Appreciating. Our next presenter is Terrence Lewis. I'll let you go straight through.
All right, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm Terrence Lewis. I'm a PhD candidate now at Auburn University. Been told I gotta celebrate these milestones. All right, so my presentation is going to be about the pedagogy of Carter G. Woodson and how his pedagogy can be used as a framework for more humanized. And I put educational experience there, and I italicized it. But the more I think about this particular framework that I'm going to present in a minute, I think it's a framework that can be applicable to many different fields that involve working with people who have been dehumanized. And I'll clarify what I mean about dehumanized here. Next couple slides. First, I want to thank our funders. I also want to thank Dr. Rollins, her team, for deeming me worthy and capable of this particular opportunity. Also want to give a special shout out to my mentor, Dr. Washington, for always being there, giving me feedback on this particular project, and also being critical and an outstanding role model for how to collect data and also lead research projects. So I appreciate that. All right, so a little bit more about me. I know we kind of got into it when I was being introduced, but I'm a former teacher. And I taught high school for a year, taught middle school. I never know what type of reaction I'm gonna get when I say I'm a former middle school teacher. Some people get crying, some people shocked. But I was always intentional about my art and my practice as a teacher. And so what I would do, I would attend presentations, a lot of times funding this out of my own pocket, sometimes presented those conferences and giving presentations, or I'll read a book, or I'll reach out to a colleague. And so about 2 years ago, this book came out by Dr. Jarvis Givens. It's called Fugitive Pedagogy, Carter G. Woodson, and the Art of Black Teaching. And I read the book, and in the book, he gave an outstanding definition of what he termed fugitive pedagogy. And this is what he said. He said, fugitivity is covert, is concealed, is hidden, is planned, and it's intentional. And I underline planned and intentional because I want to come back to that in a minute. Strategy that consists of African Americans' physical and intellectual acts that explicitly challenge anti-Black, and in parentheses, I put dehumanization, protocols of educational domination. And toward the end of the book, he kind of gave some very vague recommendations about how this can be applied to current educational settings. And what he said is that fugitivity was something that's largely confined within the context of Jim Crow. So it's not really something that teachers who did not teach Jim Crow could do. I kind of disagree with that to a degree, but what I was able to pull from the book was this theme of the reclamation of humanity. And initially I put restoration of humanity, but restoration kind of insinuates that something was dead and had to be revived. And I don't think dehumanized people would agree with that. So I put reclamation instead. And so who is responsible for this coining of the term fugitive pedagogy? So in the book, he talks about Carter G. Woodson. So oftentimes when we speak of Carter G. Woodson, he's spoken about in regarding his relation to Black history and Black History Month. However, little is known about his experience as a public school teacher, both within the United States and also abroad. He taught abroad. His experience as a principal, actually at M Street High School in Washington, D.C. His experience as a professor and dean of 2 universities. His experience as a curriculum writer, community activist, and lastly, I had to put it, because I have both personal and professional interests here, a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. That's right. So little is often known about his experiences within those particular areas. However, those areas, I think, adds value to how we can use his work, his ideas, his pedagogy to humanize practices for individuals who have been dehumanized. So this is what I did. So this caused me to ponder on the question. And I always told my students when I left K-12, I was like, look, I'm doing this for y'all. So I was not well versed in the higher ed space, but I was like, if I'm gonna do it, I want to make some type of impact to better K-12. So I got to thinking when I was reading the book, I was like, I think it's more there. And so I said, how might a Carter G. Woodson educational framework improve and humanize all students' educational experience? And I'll come back to what I mean by all at the end of the presentation as well. So what I did was I paid homage to the field and I conducted a literature review. So what are other scholars saying about this similar idea of Carter G. Woodson and his work? And this is what I found. So here recently, probably around the 2000s, scholars began, majority in the social sciences, began to call for Carter G. Woodson and his work to be included within educational foundations classes. And so for those who are not familiar, like those are the classes that teacher candidates will take to learn about theory. Majority of the time when you take those classes, you learn about John Dewey or Vygotsky or Freire, but those classes hardly ever include, or if they do include, Black intellectual thought. So that's what those scholars were calling on in the early 2000s. So then, as it relates to my particular field, there's a scholar at the University of Buffalo, LaGarrette King, and some scholars at UT Austin, Kathleen Brown and Anthony Brown. They wrote about how his work can be applied to social studies. And this is the framework that they came up with. So they said that using the Wilsonian conceptual framework to teach social studies, teachers ought to approach that scientifically. So what that means is teachers ought to engage in a scientific inquiry of their students. And that's regardless of race. Teachers need to know what they're teaching about their teaching their students about culture. In this case, more particularly race. He said that's critical. That's critical in order to present it in a critical manner. So they have to know that in order to present it in a critical manner. And then these scholars said, okay, well, the instruction ought to be practical. So students ought to be able to do something with it. So they shouldn't just be simply regurgitating facts. It ought to be relevant for them, and then it ought to have some type of impact outside of the classroom. But the framework stopped there. And so I got to thinking again about this particular question. And so I think it's a little bit more there. And so I did a little bit more research. So I did a primary source analysis, some more personal reflection. And while I think the work of King and Brown speaks to the art of teaching, I also think there's a science that needs to be considered as well. And so I said, okay, when you think about humanizing experiences for those who have been dehumanized, you probably need to be critical in your reflection. So for an example, how does me, as a Black man who hopefully will have a PhD, how does that separate me from the experiences, the thoughts of my students who might not even know what a PhD is? Maybe someone in their family might not even have a PhD. Those type of things matter, regardless that I'm Black teaching Black students. But how does those privileges differentiate those experiences? And then I said, okay, but you can't stop there. I said Carter G. Woodson also had a belief. So although he was the second Black man to get a PhD from Harvard, he also believed that there were factors, societal factors, that dehumanize Black students. He was talking in that context of Black students. And so his thoughts about education, and I'm very particular about the word education and not schooling, because I think those two are different. His thoughts about education was that education ought to liberate students, education, not schooling. And so within that primary source analysis, this is where I pulled from. So when it comes to critical reflection, in every text that Carter G. Woodson wrote, I only listed two here for the sake of time and space, because these are the two most notable, The Miseducation of the Negro and The Negro in Our History. But in all his textbooks, in the preface of those textbooks, Carter G. Woodson always said, in my professional or personal experience, this is why I'm writing this piece. And he will also say, to a degree, I played a role in some of the results that were not satisfactory. So that's that critical reflection piece that I got it. All right, so his teacher beliefs. I want to share a quick story about Carter G. Woodson. He got robbed one day. He lived in Washington, D.C. His home his office was actually the bottom floor of his home. And so he was walking back home one day in Washington, D.C. and he was robbed. And he tells this story with a lot of humor. He was robbed, and he called the robbers. I was robbed by two Black thugs, and they took everything that I had. But he said, it was in that moment that I understood what it means to be impoverished. Now, he could have said, no, those were two Black thugs and they deserved everything that was coming to them. But he said, no, I understand. Because had they not been impoverished, it's a good possibility that they would have done it. That's where that belief in terms of societal structures plays a role. And then liberatory education, I just put the Black History Bulletin here, which was one of the many publications that he had, which just essentially filled the void that Carnegie Woodson said Black students needed. Now, how does this relate to the center? I put a definition, dehumanization. So I think oftentimes we think of a negative connotation when we think of dehumanization. So I said it's the failure, either direct or indirect, of recognizing and acknowledging the complexities and difference of human experience. So all of our experiences are different. And when I essentially devalue yours, or I say yours doesn't have meaning, I'm essentially perpetuating dehumanization. Now, how does this relate to the center? I'll skip that. I really think that this particular framework can help practitioners make meaning of how they can humanize their practice. So I listed a few questions here as it relates to the center. So for example, what do social workers describe as their reasons for pursuing a career in social work? I think it would be beneficial to think about, what they believe about the systems and what they believe about the role of social work and kind of changing or nuance and challenging those. Number two is, how do cities or county municipalities account for race and gender inequity and policies related to housing and or public decisions, or anything else you want to put in that particular category? And then a more larger ethnographic study would be like, what are the humanizing practices and implementation practices of a city, county serving the majority of people of color? And I'll end by saying this, and this is just my thought, my personal perspective. And this is how I end this piece that's currently in press. I got the second round of reviews back 4 days ago, so fingers crossed everything ends up well. But I end the piece by saying this, because I wrote it in the context of maybe being a possibility for Black boys. When we are intentional, explicit, purposeful, any type of word you want to put to describe fidelity, we got a lot of explicit, intentional. When we are intentional about ensuring that the experiences of Black boys, or in this case, humans, when we're intentional about the experience, making sure that they are humanized, I think we'll humanize the experience.
Your teaching skills are presented very nicely. On display, thank you very much. In the interest of time, we're going to go very quickly to the next presenter. Not taking away any of your time, so be comfortable. Take as much time as you need.
Yeah. So I am really excited to bring up the rear professional scholars. So today I'm going to be presenting a little bit, which is also kind of closely related to the center. So the dissertation is tentatively entitled "Feed a Drive: How Poverty, Punishment, and Policy Shape the Lives of Suspended Drivers." So want to thank Center and our funder, and particularly my mentor, Dr. Armadale, and also my advisor, Dr. Anthony. Very instrumental in the development of this project. So we'll talk a little bit about the motivation for this project, the research questions that I asked, my data and methods, results, some of the implications that I think also matter here at the center, and then close out. So in recent decades, the proliferation of monetary sanctions has been a thing. So oftentimes these sanctions are imposed for a wide range of offenses, including traffic infractions. And something that's really interesting about these sanctions, we've seen a rise in monetary sanctions in particular, because they are supposed to be an alternative to incarceration for folks. They are supposed to be less punitive, less damaging to individuals and to their families. But spoiler alert, what we find is that might not actually be the case. Thinking about the side of my research, some states actually restrict driving privilege, outstanding legal debt, traffic debt being included in outstanding legal debt. North Carolina being one of those places. So for folks who are unable to pay debt, they may either receive a failure to appear, meaning that citation said that they were summoned to court to either plead guilty or charges that were levied, the citations that were levied against them, and they failed to do so. Or they may be issued a ticket for which there is an actual financial fee that they must pay, and they fail to comply, failure to the court. And they may have their license suspended as a result of doing that. So I believe that these punitive policies are a very clear example of how systems are structured to criminalize rather than address. So I think this is important because these types of
policies directly contribute to the production and or reproduction of racial inequality. And I say that because in North Carolina in 2021, we had over 1 million people who had active driver's license suspensions and directly or indirectly as a result of their inability to pay their legal financial obligations or their traffic debts. Black individuals represent nearly 40% of suspended motorists due to these traffic-related financial obligations, although they are a much smaller percentage of driving folks in North Carolina. And this reproduction of inequality, this overrepresentation of Black folks in this pool, it really matters because these driver's license suspensions in particular results in a myriad of collateral consequences for folks. So the negative outcomes that people experience as a result of being an unlicensed or suspended motorist. One in particular that we'll focus on for this section of the talk will be people's access to employment. So the literature tells us that inability for individuals with low incomes to access transportation is a significant barrier to their employment. So I wanted to know a little bit more about that. What are the barriers? How are people barriers? How are they navigating these things? So with that in mind, I asked this broad kind of overarching research question around how driver's license suspensions shape the lived experience. And sub-question, particularly related to this section of the talk, are why do these suspended motorists experience barriers there? So before we talk a little bit about the findings, I want to introduce our community partner. So city officials in North Carolina started really thinking about racial inequality in the city and what it is that they can do to combat racial inequality. And like many of our other partners here, they held some community listening sessions. And over and again, members of the community said, if you care about racial inequality, if you want to do something for us, you'll do something about this driver's license thing here in North Carolina. So from there, the DEAR program was born. This is the Durham Expunction and Restoration Program. The DEAR program has two functions. So they do criminal record expunction, and then they also do driver's license restoration. So we'll be speaking specifically about the restoration functions of the program. So in 2018, what the city decided to do was, this is just a huge issue for deal with. There's so many people with suspended license for these traffic-related reasons. Instead of continuing to have folks come into clinic or down to the courthouse, what they decided to do was a mass wave of relief. So folks who had traffic tickets, I believe from 2018 and older, that were eligible, meaning they were low-level, minor traffic things. They did not include DUI, DWI in the county, were eligible for relief. So for thousands of folks, what they did was they waived those times. Now, the thing that is really interesting, that I think matters for our outcomes, stories that folks share, is this little snippet that I will share with you all as well. There's a lot of morality associated with driving, like and why people don't have them. Durham is a relatively progressive city and an otherwise conservative. And city officials were very concerned that this type of policy or this type of program would not pass the assembly. So it wasn't widely marketed. They did some low-level canvassing in communities in Durham that may have been particularly affected by driver's license suspensions, but large kind of media campaigns there were not for concern. The General Assembly passed legislation to prevent local governments from doing things like this that would benefit the community. So there are a lot of folks who received the relief who have no idea that they did. So many of our participants found out by happenstance, right? They may have heard mouth, they may have gone to the website and put their name in a database, see if they happen to be in there. But there are many folks who received this relief who actually have no legal financial obligations that are barring them from license restoration, who may not know that they have benefited from this service. So something to keep in mind as we talk a little bit about our sample and the experiences that folks have had. So our data and methods, we were provided a database from the city of Durham, folks who have interacted with DEER, who were DEER eligible. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have gone through the program, but they were eligible to have received relief from the city. And we sampled from the database. So we completed 39 in-depth semi-structured interviews. It's important to note that these interviews were conducted between May 2021, but also just thinking about the context of what's happening in people's lives. This is still during the COVID period. So I think that matters for who we ended up talking to, why people were eligible to talk to us. It may be because folks needed somebody to talk to. They needed a bit of interaction. Paying our participants $5 for their participation for about 1 hour or so with us. But what I can say of the 39 people that we talked to, people were very generous. They were very gracious, sharing their time and their experiences with us. So as I mentioned, on average, these interviews lasted about 60 minutes. We talked about a range of topics, but related to this presentation, we discussed things around employment and transportation. So we asked individuals how they travel from place to place, the availability of and reliance on public and other forms of transportation, how license suspensions may have or not disrupted their employment status, perceptions of employment opportunities, and then financial stability. So a little bit about our sample. So I will draw your attention to this kind of far left column here, the DEER team interviewees. So as you will see, the vast majority of the respondents that we spoke to were Black identifying, and about 70% of them were men. And even though we don't capture data specifically in our demographic questions, many of them did disclose through the course of their interviews that they had previous justice involvement at some point in their life. 44 was about the average age of most of the folks in our sample, so these aren't necessarily young adults who we're talking to. And many of these folks, 50% had an FTA, 76 had an FTC. Basically, what that is signaling is these folks had some type of outstanding legal financial obligation that contributed to their license suspension. So to some of our results. I made a pass through all of these transcripts that we have collected and coded for themes. And one of the most prominent themes that kind of emerged from our data around these barriers to employment. So we interviewed 39 people, and at least 31 of the, at 39 of the 39 made some reference to experiencing barriers to employment. So we describe barriers to employment as kind of, how respondents describe the way driving restrictions pose challenges to being able to identify, secure, or maintain life-sustaining employment. So one of the big things that kind of came from this data is that license is an employer requirement. And we're still teasing out exactly what that looks like, but broadly, license can either be an employer preference or it can be a necessity. And by preference, I mean the employer has some preference for you to have a license. We're not exactly sure why. There is some work around this that suggests the credential is a signal of some sort. It may signal something about an individual's character. It may signal something about their dependability, their ability to show up to work, etc. Or it can be a necessity. And these are primarily like driving jobs. So I must have a license to legally be able to fulfill the functions of this job. But whether it's a preference or whether it's a necessity, what a lot of folks talked about are unrealized opportunities because they cannot take these jobs on. And our respondents are forgoing applying to certain roles or some jobs altogether. And some people may look at this and say, that is quite unresponsible. You have no job, right? Some job is better than any job. But our people are not irresponsible at all. They're actually doing really careful cost-benefit analysis. And they are thinking about their time versus the effort applying to certain types of jobs. And if I'm only going to be rejected anyway, then I put my time elsewhere. Something else that came up quite a lot for folks is that when the license is a requirement, they're forgoing applying to certain types of roles, and these are often professional, right? And it actually routes them into pathways where they only have access to low wage work. So I'll share this quote from Alexis, who is a 26-year-old Black woman who is working as a caregiver that I think really highlights this point. She says, honestly, I would say because of my work background, my work history, it somewhat discouraged me a little bit from applying to a specific job, maybe like an administrative assistant or a receptionist and things like that. It just depends on the place. I would say, because, you know, a lot of people don't really care about how you get to work getting there, but the places that I would apply, you know, they were a little bit mindful of saying, yes, we require a valid driver's license and things like that. And since I didn't have the license, it kind of discouraged me from even applying. Even though my resume, you know, work experience and everything definitely qualifies me, it's just that one little thing that unqualifies me. Second, big finding, and probably not surprising, is around transportation dependence. So folks in our sample are pretty evenly split. Some of them still drive, some of them don't drive anymore. This particular category tends to affect more often those who don't drive. They are relying on public transportation, which are buses in our area, rides from family and friends, or rideshare services. And common theme among all of these options for transportation alternatives, as we call them, is that they're unpredictable. They don't get folks to opportunities that are outside urban centers. So this idea of totally lost my mind. This idea that, look, I'm sorry. Oh, I can't think of it right now. But this idea that like the good jobs are just outside of the urban centers where folks don't have access to them. And then also depending on, you know, the unpredictability, the unreliability of some of this transportation, folks are experiencing job termination or job downgrading. So Sonia, a 55-year-old Black woman who's a school system employee, says, oh man, I had plenty of offers like second shift work back in those days, and the buses stopped and that job was to 12. So I couldn't take it. I went to the orientation and everything, but I couldn't take the job because I had no way home. And then finally, I am missing a slide. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, y'all. Oh, wrong one. Well, that was something. I am missing this slide here, but I will just say briefly that I mentioned that many of the men in our sample have been justice involved. And I think something that is often encouraged for men in particular that have been justice involved is this idea of entrepreneurship, right? Like you can't get legit jobs, you can't get jobs connected to the formal economy. Like, how do you think about working for yourself? And we have a couple of men in our sample who have done just that. And what we find is that this license piece is really a barrier to these men as well. So we have Dwayne here, who is 50, Black man, is a locksmith, owns his own business as a locksmith, but you gotta be mobile to open people's doors. And he says, you know, I had a call. I got my own pop and lock company. You know, if I got a call to go and unlock the door, you know, I got to take chances of going to unlock it because I don't have a license. So it's like, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. Trying to feed my family, trying to generate, you know, enough money so I can do some habits and so forth, whatever, you know, whatever the case may be. But 9 times out of 10, you might get one ticket trying to do this work. So some implications for the center work. These employment barriers produce real and significant financial burdens that permeate the fabric of our participants' lives. So additional work in this dissertation also think more critically about fines and fees and how they aid in debt accumulation for a lot of our individuals. And even the start of being unable to pay these fees to begin with. So many of our individuals are making trade-offs between other legal financial obligations, other financial obligations that they may have. For many of the men, child support is one of those things, how people are navigating the consequences of not paying that child support as opposed to the consequences of this legal financial obligation. And then something that has really shown is that not only are people's economic situations affected, but they're non-economic situations as well. And that is particularly showing up in the disrupted family functioning across generations. So we are seeing disrupted relationships between parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren, as a result of this legal restriction on people's ability to move themselves freely. And I think the last thing that I will say is that we think a lot about driver's license suspension and what that means about people who these humans are. But for these folks who continue to drive and continue to experience these consequences, this is a form of Black resistance, right? In a place like North Carolina, where we don't have robust systems of public transportation, folks have to drive to get places that they need to do these life-sustaining activities for them and for their families. And this is how they exercise agency over their lives and their situations in really negative, with this really negative situation. And they just happen to be actions where people are exerting this agency over themselves that is criminalized and results in all of these negative collateral consequences that people experience for decades. So thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
There's a comfort level in your presentation, which makes you know what you're talking about. I owe you in place with just 2 moments, please. Dr. Gray, if you will come up. Dr. Rollins will likewise come up. And with all the scholars, please come up as well. This is our next generation of talent. Next generation of scholarship is well in place. We have a token of appreciation for each of you. And at the same time, if there are a few questions that you guys would like to pepper them with while you're getting ready, go right ahead, because well, this we don't have to do anything like that. So go right ahead.
I have a question for you. Thank you for kind of sharing the book as a resource of Dr. Gibbons' work. And he kind of shares about part of you was in the role of his uncle, who also was a teacher, right? And so I'm just interested in your thoughts, like the phenomena of teacher development and like how, particularly within African-American families, the role of a teacher, how oftentimes the connections we make, our beliefs about children are passed down from a mother, father who was a teacher or a family member to a younger person who becomes a teacher, right? If you could speak to anything that you see around that particular phenomenon and how social justice orientation or equity, you know what I mean? How that can be passed down within the context of teacher family, right? If you could speak to that. Just your thoughts.
Well, my honest opinion.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think it could be great, but I honestly think it could be detrimental as well, and here's why. Like, so for an example, if you go back to the piece where I said you gotta be critical in your reflection.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if you come from a family where your grandmother was the principal of the local elementary school, or your grandfather was the first Black superintendent for Black children, those were titles that existed during those particular contexts. You probably came from a different family dynamic that had different values in how you view education. So the way that looks now in my professional experiences, I used to work with a lot of teachers that came from those profiles. My grandparents on either side, neither one, well, grandmother, grandfathers, they didn't finish their middle school education.
Right.
Luckily my mom and her majority of her siblings did, and my dad did. They did go on to get a degree. But my point being is that we tend to have, I would say, jaded views about schooling. Like, Black children don't do well because they don't value education. There are Black teachers who would say that and perpetuate that because of the way in which education has impacted and influenced their lives. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's great, but that might not be someone else's experience. So where I think in terms of like the art, how they engage in the community, how they taught Black children. I mean, I think those things can be beneficial, but I think it's still critical that we investigate that privilege that came with that position.
I'll take one last comment here from Dr. Gray. And if you wonderful people would be so happy to hold up your wonderful tokens of appreciation, you can always pepper them in the hallway. They're gonna be around for a while. Don't let them get away without asking additional questions. But we are a little bit over time because we take for them. So thank you very much for indulging us.
Sure, and I'll just say, thank you all for your wonderful presentations. When we were envisioning the center, this is exactly what we saw. We talked about one of the primary tenets of the center is building the pipeline, having people, the positionality, folks that understand the experience, live the experience, and can do this work in a rigorous way so that we all benefit from it. So you make us all very proud, and I'm very excited to see everything that comes next. So thank you all.
The last comment had, big applause for all of the mentors and everyone that had a hand in this wonderful talent, but you have to remember, they were talented before they got here, they're even more talented now, but they're gonna make us proud into the future.
It's right in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you so much for attending. We still have time to pepper them with any questions, but we have to close out. So thank you all for attending.